livestock, the birds in the sky, all the wild animals. But for the human, no suitable helper was found. So the Lord God caused the human to fall into a deep sleep. And while he was sleeping, he took part of the human's side and then closed up the place with flesh. Then the Lord God made a woman from the part he had taken out of the human, and he brought her to him. And the human said, this is now bone of my bones, flesh of my flesh. She shall be called woman, for she was taken out of man. And that is why a man leaves his father and mother and is united to his wife, and they become one flesh. And they, both the man and the woman, were naked, and they felt no shame. The human is in the garden, has a beautiful place to live, has abundant food, has meaningful work caring for the garden. The human is close, spatially and relationally, to God. What more could this human need? And yet God sees that something, or better yet, someone, is missing. It is not good for the human to be alone. And this not good stands in contrast to the refrain in Genesis 1, in the first creation story, where repeatedly God looks upon what God has made and says, it is good, it is good, it is good, until finally it's very good. But here it's not good. It is not good for this human to be alone. This human needs a suitable helper, needs a partner, needs a companion, needs an ally to help care for God's garden. Caring for God's sacred space is too big a job for the human to do alone. So God sets out to find a suitable helper for this human. And God does this by creating a vast array of animals and birds and parading them in front of the human so the human can name them. This appears to be God's way of asking the human, how about this one? How about this one? How about this one? Are any of these creatures qualified? Can any of these animals function as a suitable helper for you? Can they be your partner, your ally in life? And from the animals, a suitable helper for the human cannot be found. They just don't match. The horse is too fast. The hippo is too large. The parakeet is too chirpy. The porcupine too prickly. The bulldog too stubborn. The cat too emotionally unavailable. And the Lord recognizes that this human needs someone else just like him, only different. So he causes the human to fall into a deep sleep, and while he's sleeping, forms a woman from the human side. Now, your translation might say rib, and that is one way to translate that word, but I think a better way to translate it is side. It's both a word for the human body, a rib, but it could also be an architectural term like the side of a door, the side of a building. And it's possible what this story is saying is not that God took one bone from the human to form a woman, but instead, God split the human, split the atom, if you will. If not literally, then figuratively, to form a suitable counterpart, a suitable helper. And when the woman in the story is described as a helper, the storyteller is in no way suggesting that she is inferior or subordinate to the man. The word used for helper to describe the woman is more often used in the Hebrew Scriptures to describe God. We've already encountered one reference to God as helper in our call to worship today. Where does my help come from? My help comes from the Lord, the maker of heaven and earth. God is our helper. And if anything, since God is our helper, then one way of interpreting helper in this story is as someone who is more capable, more powerful, someone who is stronger, coming to the aid of a weaker person. As in, God saw the human in the garden and said, that boy needs help. I better make a woman for him. But no, there's nothing superior or inferior about the term helper in this context. The woman is the man's partner, the man's ally, the man's equal. That's the genius of forming the woman from the man's side, not his head, not his foot, from the side. Neither one of them is created to be, nor is intended to be, superior or inferior to the other. They are partners. They are equals. And when God presents the woman to the man, he says, finally, this is the one. She really is the most beautiful woman he has ever laid eyes on. He breaks out into poetry, which is quite the accomplishment. This is the first time we hear him speak in the story, and it's poetry. Bone of my bone, flesh of my flesh. He identifies her, and in doing so, he also identifies himself. He says, this is woman, I am man. Using the Hebrew word for man, male, for the first time in the story, it's as if he really doesn't know who he is until he first sees her. And then there's more wordplay as well. The woman, Isha, is taken from Ish, the man. And then the storyteller says this is why the Ish, the man, leaves his father and mother to join the Isha and become one flesh. This is the logic of splitting the atom. Marriage is the coming together, the reunion of the two that were originally one. The one becomes two, and the two become one flesh. And so these two disappear into the garden together, holding hands, singing, I only have eyes for you. They have a beautiful place to live, abundant food, meaningful work. They have God, and they have each other. What could possibly go wrong? Well, next week we'll answer that question, because something does go wrong. But today I'll finish with a couple of revelations from this part of the story. One is a revelation about what it means to be human, and the other is about the kind of God this story reveals. First, this story reveals the necessity of human community. One of our church's core values is combating isolation. We trace that value all the way back to this story in Genesis 2. It is not good for human beings to be alone. We cannot fulfill our potential or our purpose as human beings. We cannot be who we are created to be. We cannot do what we are created to do by ourselves. We need help, and not just from God. Sometimes, perhaps in an effort to declare our absolute dependence on God, or maybe perhaps to pretend to be more spiritual than we really are, we say things like, all I need is God. Or in gatherings like this, we sing things like, God, you are all I need, when it's clearly not true. For this human being in the garden alone with God is not enough. It is not good. The human needs something more. The human needs someone more. The human needs someone like him, but different. We are not created to simply dwell in the presence of God. We are created to dwell in God's presence with others, which is why the gospel not only connects us with God necessarily, but also includes us in a community, a church, so that we can never be alone. See, we need not ever be alone. In Genesis 2, the solution to the problem of the human being alone is marriage, and then later on, a family. But the gospel adds to and transcends this initial solution with the church, so that marriage is not the only way, and in some instances, it's not even the best way for isolated individuals to find community. In our fractured, polarized world where community is hard to find and it's even more difficult to maintain, the gospel offers all of us, the busy, the wealthy, the poor, the single, the married, the divorced, the estranged, the depressed, the anxious, the alone, and the lonely. The gospel offers all of us a new community, a new family, a church to which we can belong with other people who are just like us, only different. This story reveals the necessity of human community. It also reveals a God who responds to our needs. In Genesis 1, it's creation that responds to God. God speaks, something happens. But here in Genesis 2, in this creation story, God is responding to creation, especially the needs of humanity. The human needs a place to live. God plants a garden. The human needs food. God fills that garden with fruit-bearing trees. The human needs a meaning, a purpose in life. God gives the human a job, care for the garden. It's not good for the human to be alone. God takes creative action to solve that problem as well. And this is a preview of what we will see God doing throughout the biblical story. Time and time again, God will observe something within the world, within God's creation, that is not good. It is not good for the human to be alone, but it is also not good for God's people to be enslaved by a wicked tyrant, the Pharaoh of Egypt. It is not good for humans to be enslaved by the power of sin. It is not good for humanity to live in fear of death, which itself is a kind of slavery. And in response to these not goods, God takes creative action to solve the problem. In the story we find ourselves in, which has not yet reached an end, we believe that God has already observed and recognized our deepest needs and has already addressed them in the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus. And while the world we live in is not as it should be, not as it could be, we also hope and trust that God is working to solve the problem. We trust, we hope that someday we too will go into a deep sleep. And like Adam, when God wakes us up, we will find that while we were sleeping, God was creatively working to transform all that is not good about our world into a glorious, new, very good creation. This is the promise of the gospel, making all things new. This is the hope of resurrection, waking up to a new world. And this is what Jesus makes possible through his life, death, and resurrection. Through his ascension where he reigns in heaven, and through his return when he comes to be King of kings and Lord of lords once and for all. And this is God's response to our deepest needs. Let's now go to the table.